Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be." Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. When I got my first church job, I went from sharing a very small 2-bedroom seminary apartment to living in a 3-story, 11-room parsonage. People used to ask me how I lived in such a big place all by myself, and I would answer, happily and in every room. You see, since I was a kid, I had craved space, the luxury of a space that was just my own, a space I didn't have to share with my little brother or the rest of my family. And so I reveled in filling that house with all sorts of treasures. I went to flea markets every weekend and garage sales and sales at department stores, and I filled it. And I filled it, and I filled it for 4 years. And then I decided to move east to go to school where I would live in much smaller accommodations, a 1-bedroom apartment to be exact. And so before I moved, I weeded and sorted all of my treasures literally for months. I had a big rummage sale, a garage sale really, was in front of my garage. I gave things away to people. At the end of all of that activity, you would have think that I would have whittled it down by just a little bit, but I was still overwhelmed by all of my stuff. I vividly remember sitting in the living room on the last night in that great big house, sitting in the living room in a big chair surrounded by mountains of boxes filled with all kinds of stuff, and I felt so trapped, so frustrated. I grabbed a pen and paper, and this is what I wrote. Surrounded with things but empty inside, I yearn for the poverty that sets one free to explore all it means to be alive. But I am trapped by my own comforts and suffocated with happiness. I was very earnest as a 25-year-old. Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be." That move east was in 1991, and one would think that I learned a valuable lesson by having to get rid of all my stuff. I suppose I did. It just wasn't a complete lesson. I do live with a lot less stuff than I used to, but that's more a product of being a Manhattanite than of having a heart change. But even with less, there are still moments when I feel trapped by all of my comforts, a slave to supporting a certain kind of life, suffocated by the American dream. There are moments when I want to jettison most of what I own and stop worrying about it all. But then television and subway ads and magazines and internets and friends and strangers all tell me about those wonderful, sparkly, shiny things that I do not have but still need. Things I simply cannot live without. And sometimes I buy into the lie, and when I buy into that lie, then my heart is located smack dab in the middle of a Madison Avenue fantasy world. That's where it is. Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be." And just before he makes this statement, he gives us some practical, if very hard to hear advice about how his followers are supposed to achieve this pure-hearted state. This is how you do it. Sell your possessions, Jesus says, and give your money to the poor. Make purses for yourself that do not wear out, unfailing treasures in heaven where no thief comes near, no moth destroys. Like I said last Sunday, the gospel of Jesus, the gospel that Jesus preached, is not an easy sale in these United States. As one theologian has put it, if you want to really grow your church, do not preach the things that Jesus taught. Some preachers don't. Some preach something that sounds a lot different than what Jesus taught. Do some channel surfing on Sunday morning, and what you'll find are preachers telling you that the very best measure of God's blessing on your life is what you own. How much does God love you? Well, look at your bank account, and that will tell you a lot. And they wouldn't preach such things if we didn't lap it up like thirsty puppies. There is an audience for this stuff. We Americans just love this message. And we love our gurus, from Andrew Carnegie to Norman Vincent Peale to Joel Osteen. It's a glittering, exciting message. But is it the message that Jesus preached? Not according to the Gospel of Luke. Luke is not very friendly to money, I'm afraid. Sell your possessions, Jesus says, and give your money to the poor. This week's gospel lesson suffers from a serious editorial flaw by the compilers of the Revised Common Lectionary. Cut away completely from its fuller context, we miss Jesus' introduction to this call to sell your possessions and give your money to the poor. We miss the setup. And without the setup, we are left with the impression that the religion of Jesus is about poverty and about following a prescriptive way of life. But selling your possessions and giving your money to the poor is not just another set of rules. In fact, these are not rules at all. In fact, these are reactions. Jesus is talking about reactions that we have, not rules that we follow. These are reactions to understanding something deeper and more important. Reactions to revelation. They are the natural responses of any human being who finally understands that the great God who created everything that is loves us, body and soul, knows us by our names. So let's put it back in context. Just before telling his followers to sell their possessions and give their money to the poor, Jesus said, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Isn't that a lovely statement? And just before he said that, he described what this kingdom of God that God delights to give us, described what it's like with these words. Don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear, for life is more than food and the body more than clothing. If you don't believe that, consider the birds, Jesus said. They neither sow nor reap, they neither have storehouses nor barns, yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? Consider the wildflowers, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even queens and kings in all of their glory are not clothed like that. But if God so clothes the flowers of the field, which are alive today and gone tomorrow, how much more will God clothe you? So strive for God's reign. And all of these things will be given to you as well, for it makes God happy to give you the kingdom. St. Paul once described this kingdom of God as righteousness, peace, and joy. And isn't it interesting to note that those are the kinds of commodities that money never ever can buy? The problem with our accumulation of things is that they so often blind us to the real world. The real world. The righteousness, peace, and joy that are rightfully ours. We think that all of these other things will make us happy. I think it. I fall into the trap all the time, but those things never make me happy. After a couple of months, I'm sick of them too. And yet I cling to those things and starve myself of the very things I need to live. Righteousness, peace, joy. Jesus longs for us not only to be clothed and fed, but to find our passion, our purpose, our reason for being. Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be." David Livingstone was a 19th century Scottish Presbyterian medical missionary and explorer in Central Africa, who by all accounts was dearly loved by the people he served. He was the first European, anyway, to see the great Victoria Falls, which he then named in honor of the reigning monarch. He is the subject of the famous meeting with H.M. Stanley, which gave rise to the popular quotation, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." Livingstone contributed a great deal to European knowledge about the continent of Africa. He inspired, perhaps most importantly for me, abolitionists of the slave trade. He opened the way in Central Africa to missionaries who actually did do some good things: education, healthcare reforms, the spreading of the gospel. Livingstone did a lot of good with the 60 years he was on this earth. Upon his death in 1873, his body was taken back to England and buried, but at his own request, his heart was buried in the Africa he loved. At the foot of a tall tree in a small Zambian village, the people he served dug a hole and placed in it the heart of this man whom they loved and respected. A man whose heart gave bold witness to what he genuinely treasured. Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be." The 5th century desert father, Abba Pullman, put it another way. "Children," he said, "do not give your heart to that which cannot satisfy your heart." And why on earth